I never thought a simple gate could turn into a battlefield. I was standing at the edge of my driveway, gripping the cold metal handle of my gate, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Just moments ago, HOA Karen, yes, the infamous HOA Karen had stormed onto my property with a furious look that could melt steel. She had already dialed 911, her voice trembling with outrage as she claimed I was breaking some community law by locking my gate. I knew I wasn't doing anything illegal, but she didn't care. She wanted her way, and she wanted it now. I had no intention of letting her in, not today, not after everything I had endured. As I turned the key one last time, the lock clicked, and a calm resolve swept over me. Karen's face turned pale when she realized I wasn't budging. She flailed, waving her arms, screaming about fines, legal action, and the rights of the HOA. The neighbors peeked out of their windows, some whispering, some gasping, but then something happened that nobody expected. Something that left even me frozen in disbelief. The police arrived faster than I thought they would. Flashing lights, sirens, the whole dramatic entrance. Karen tried to explain, pointing at me like I was the villain in a movie, but as the officer stepped closer, something strange happened. My gate, locked tight, suddenly became the focus of attention for more than just security. The officer's expression changed from mild confusion to complete shock. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as she realized the unimaginable was unfolding right in front of her. Before anyone could even speak, a sound echoed across the yard, a sound that nobody could have prepared for. My shotgun, which had been leaning against the side of my porch, was now in my hands. I didn't raise it in anger. I didn't point it at anyone. I just held it, steady, a silent warning that this was my land, my rules. And in that moment, the world seemed to stop. Karen froze. The officers hesitated. Even the neighbors were paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. And then, the most shocking thing happened. Something I never imagined would occur when locking my gate on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Karen, trembling like a leaf in a storm, took a step back, then another, until she was halfway down the street, still screaming into her phone. The police exchanged glances, unsure what to do. And me? I just stood there, breathing, knowing that this standoff had changed everything but not knowing what was about to come next. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then, a sound from behind the gate made my blood run cold. A low, deliberate thump. Something, or someone, was on the other side. The neighbors began to murmur. The officers gripped their batons tighter. Karen froze completely. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears. And that's where it ended. For now, the question hung in the air. What was on the other side of that gate? But to truly understand why a gate, a call to the police, and a simple lock could escalate into something so shocking, you have to start at the beginning. It all started a few months ago when I moved into this quiet little neighborhood. The kind of place where everyone knew each other. The kind where lawns were mowed every Saturday, and gossip spread faster than the wind in spring. I had bought a modest plot at the edge of the community. Peaceful, private, far enough from the noisy streets but close enough to feel part of a neighborhood. I imagined long evenings reading on my porch, maybe waving to neighbors who walked their dogs, sharing small smiles and kindnesses. I didn't anticipate the HOA. The HOA in my community was a force to be reckoned with. They prided themselves on rules, regulations, and keeping the neighborhood perfect. At first, I thought it was harmless. A trimmed lawn here, a painted fence there. But as weeks went by, I realized the rules weren't just about beauty, they were about control. And control, as I would soon learn, was everything to them. Then there was Karen. HOA Karen. She had a smile that could charm anyone until it turned cold. Her passion for rules wasn't just enthusiasm, it was obsession. She patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk, measuring fences, counting mailboxes, scrutinizing trash cans. I quickly learned that if she found a leaf out of place on your lawn, she would call a meeting, send a notice, and threaten fines. She wasn't mean for the sake of being mean. She truly believed she was upholding some higher moral standard. But that standard came with a cost, and it wasn't the cost she paid. It was the cost she demanded from everyone else. I tried to be kind. I waved when she passed by. I offered her lemonade once, just to break the tension. But the more I tried to be friendly, the more rigid she became. It was like offering honey to a wild animal. It never softened her. It just made her angrier when she saw no response. Then came the gate. I had built a small, secure gate at the entrance of my property for privacy. Nothing extravagant, just a simple metal gate with a lock. I had children, pets, and a life that valued safety and quiet. For months, the gate was just part of my routine. Karen noticed it immediately. "You can't have a locked gate," she declared one day, eyes wide with moral outrage. It's against HOA rules. Everyone must have open access. I explained politely, over and over, that it was my land, my safety, my choice. But rules, in Karen's mind, were absolute. My words fell on deaf ears. I didn't realize how far she would go until that morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I saw her storming down my driveway. She was holding her phone like a weapon, ready to dial 911 at any moment. Her eyes were wide, lips pursed, determination radiating off her like heat from the sun. I knew this would be a showdown. I wasn't expecting it to escalate to the level it did, but I also knew one thing. I couldn't let her or anyone take control of my life. And that brings us back to the shocking moment at the beginning. Police lights, my shotgun, Karen screaming, and the sound on the other side of the gate. Something I couldn't yet understand. Something that would change everything. I paused, taking a breath, trying to steady my racing heart. In that pause, I remembered something my grandmother always told me. Kindness is powerful, but so is standing up for yourself. You can be gentle and strong at the same time. I clutched the gate, remembering those words. I wasn't being cruel. I was protecting my home, my family, my peace. But standing firm sometimes comes with consequences you can't predict. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. The neighbors whispered. The police watched, uncertain. Karen's phone call continued, her voice rising and falling in panic. And then, the thump again. Low, deliberate, from behind the gate. I swallowed hard. I had no idea what, or who was there. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. And just when I thought my heart couldn't race faster, another sound joined it. A quiet scratching, like claws on metal. I looked at the officers, then at Karen, and then back at the gate. Everything in me screamed, to be ready, to be careful, to be kind, but to protect what was mine. And that's where we pause, right there. On the edge of the unknown. Before we continue, I have to ask, where are you watching from? The scratching behind the gate grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. My hands tightened on the shotgun, knuckles white, but my mind raced faster than my heart. What could it be? A stray animal? A prankster neighbor? Or something worse? The officers glanced at each other, shifting uneasily, as Karen's voice cracked into the phone, spewing frantic words about trespassing and illegal behavior. I took a slow breath, trying to calm myself. I told myself to be patient. Panic never solved anything, and rushing into a reaction could make things worse. I remembered my grandmother's words again. Stand strong, but always see the other side, even if the other side doesn't see yours. For a moment, I let that thought anchor me. I wasn't just defending property, I was defending a principle. A lesson. I wanted my children to learn about courage, respect, and standing up for what's right. Then I saw a shadow through the gaps of the gate. A tall, thin figure, shrouded in early morning mist, leaning closer, trying to see past the metal bars. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure if it was human or animal. The officers took a cautious step forward, one hand resting lightly on their batons, eyes scanning every corner. Karen, frozen mid-sentence, had dropped her phone. It bounced on the asphalt with a dull thud, forgotten in her panic. I decided to speak first. Who's there? My voice was firm, controlled, though my pulse was racing. The shadow didn't move. The scratching stopped. Silence, and then a soft laugh, low, almost sinister, but playful at the same time. My skin prickled. Hello? I said again, louder. The figure didn't answer. The officers began to fidget, whispering instructions into their radios. Karen's face had gone pale as chalk. Even the neighbors, who had gathered at the edges of their lawns, were holding their breaths, unsure if they should intervene or run. I stepped closer to the gate, shotgun still in hand but lowered slightly. The shadow shifted, and then, in a flash, I realized what it was. A dog, a large, golden retriever, soaked from the morning dew, its leash tangled in the gate. It had been wandering for hours, scratching and pawing at the metal, desperate to get out. Relief flooded me, but it was mixed with a strange rush of adrenaline. My heart slowed, but the lessons of fear and control were still clear in my mind. The officers laughed softly, a release of tension, and even Karen muttered something under her breath about being ridiculous. I lowered the shotgun fully and stepped forward, freeing the dog from its trap. Its tail wagged furiously, tongue lolling as it licked my hands. Somehow, the absurdity of the situation broke the tension. Neighbors smiled awkwardly, shaking their heads, and Karen glared, muttering about wasting police time. But just as I bent to check if the dog had a collar, I felt it. A subtle vibration under my feet, like the ground itself was breathing. The hairs on my arms stood up. I looked around, Noticing that the officers and Karen had also paused, sensing something different, the air felt heavier, charged, and I realized that even though the immediate threat, the dog, was gone, something else was coming, something bigger. Karen straightened suddenly, her eyes widening again. I followed her gaze and saw it. A black SUV creeping up the street, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. No lights, no sirens, just the slow, menacing approach. My stomach sank. This wasn't random, this was intentional. Someone had come for me. I moved quickly, locking the gate tighter, positioning myself behind it, shotgun ready again. The officers moved forward, forming a protective line between the vehicle and the gate. Karen, still trembling, whispered, This isn't allowed. This can't happen here. But it didn't matter. The SUV rolled to a stop at the end of my driveway, engine idling quietly. And the door opened. A tall man stepped out, dressed entirely in black. His movements were precise, deliberate, almost predatory. My mind raced, trying to identify him, trying to calculate what he wanted. The officers called out, asking him to identify himself, but he didn't respond. Instead, he simply stood there, staring at me, unflinching. Karen backed away slightly, muttering that she was calling the HOA board. But the man ignored her, focusing solely on me, his presence radiating authority and threat. I felt a surge of fear, but beneath it, a current of determination. I wasn't going to let this man intimidate me or anyone else on my property. I remembered why I was here. Why I fought for my land. My peace. I wasn't just defending metal and wood. I was defending life, stability, and the lessons I wanted to pass down. And then it happened. The man reached into his pocket, not a weapon, not a threatening device, but a phone. He pressed something, and instantly, the SUV's back doors opened, revealing dozens of packages, all marked with my name. Confused, I stepped closer. The officers were tense, hands hovering near their belts. Karen's jaw dropped, her eyes wide in disbelief. The packages began to spill out, one by one, revealing gifts, groceries, letters, and personal notes. Each one seemed carefully chosen, with messages about kindness, empathy, and community. My chest tightened. I realized this man wasn't here to threaten me, he was delivering something unexpected, something that seemed almost miraculous. But as I moved to examine the first package, a loud crash echoed from the side yard. My head snapped toward the noise. Another shadow moved quickly, faster than a human should. My heart skipped a beat. Officers shouted, trying to contain whatever or whoever it was. Karen screamed again, but this time, it wasn't anger, it was fear. Something or someone was moving in the shadows of my property, approaching the gate from the side, unseen by anyone else. My stomach churned. I knew instinctively that this was no ordinary event. Whatever it was, it had intent. And it was coming for me. The man in black looked at me, calm, almost neutral, as if he knew exactly what was happening and wanted me to face it. I swallowed hard. The dog barked, running to the back of the yard, sensing the tension. Karen tried to dial her phone again, but her hands were shaking too violently. The officers called out, demanding identification, but the figure didn't stop. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the figure stopped. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The man in black turned, gesturing for me to follow him toward the SUV. I hesitated. The packages were still scattered across my driveway, a strange juxtaposition of kindness and the unknown threat. Before I could make a decision, the shadow moved again, this time faster, closer, and with a clear intention to breach the gate. My shotgun rose instinctively, every nerve screaming to protect my home. And that's where we stop again. At the edge of danger, with kindness spilling at my feet and a new threat moving closer. I had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This day, this gate, and this standoff were far from over. The shadow moved closer, silent and deliberate, like it had studied every inch of my yard before making its move. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, feeling the cold metal against my palms, and positioned myself in front of the gate, ready for whatever was about to happen. The officers fanned out, forming a protective semicircle, their eyes fixed on the dark figure. Karen's shrill voice broke the tension, shouting something about law-breaking and immediate arrest, but no one listened. We were frozen in a moment, suspended between fear and action. The man in black by the SUV didn't move, his calm, unreadable expression almost infuriating. He seemed entirely unbothered by the approaching threat, as if he already knew the outcome. My mind raced. Who or what was coming? And why had this man delivered packages, full of kindness, in the middle of this chaos? I had no answers, just a gut feeling that I needed to stay alert, to stay alive, and to protect my property at all costs. Suddenly, The shadow lunged. It was fast, faster than a human should be, and it slammed against the gate. My hands flew to the lock, holding it steady as the force pushed hard. The officers shouted, some drawing their batons, others stepping toward the gate to brace it. The dog barked furiously, running in circles, sensing the threat. Karen froze entirely, her phone dropping to the ground again. Forgotten. The impact was enough to shake the gate, rattling the metal and making the lock tremble. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. Step back, I shouted, voice firm, trying to command authority over the chaos. The shadow didn't listen. It pushed harder, scratching at the gate, trying to force its way through. Each thump echoed like a drumbeat, filling the yard with tension. I took a deep breath and remembered something my father once told me. Fear is not the enemy. Inaction is. When danger comes, you must move, but you must also think. I knew I couldn't let panic take over. I had to act smart, act strong. With careful precision, I shifted slightly, bracing my body against the gate and tightening my grip on the shotgun. The shadow pushed again, and this time, the metal creaked under the force. Then, almost as quickly as it started, the shadow froze. A low, grating hiss filled the air, chilling me to the bone. My hands tightened instinctively around the shotgun. The man in black stepped forward, calm, measured, raising one hand in a slow, deliberate gesture. The shadow paused, and for a moment, I wondered if it would retreat or escalate. And then it spoke, a voice low and strange, almost mechanical, but with unmistakable intent. Open the gate, it said. Now. I froze. My mind screamed that I shouldn't obey, that my property and my safety were at stake. The officers murmured among themselves, uncertain how to respond. Karen whimpered, her face pale, her hands trembling, but I couldn't move. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just a physical threat. It was psychological, a test of control, of patience, of courage. The man in black shifted slightly, his presence suddenly heavier, more commanding. Trust me, he said softly, but firmly, his eyes locked on mine. There's no threat here, but you must act. My brain spun with questions. Was this some elaborate prank? A threat disguised as kindness? The packages he delivered earlier seemed to suggest goodwill, but the shadow at the gate was proof that I couldn't ignore danger. I had to decide, quickly, whether to follow my instincts or his instructions. I stepped back slightly, loosening my grip on the gate just enough to listen. The shadow didn't attack. It simply waited, still low, deliberate, tense. I noticed details I hadn't seen before. The shadow was humanoid, yes, but its movements were almost too precise, too controlled. Its eyes glimmered in the morning light, reflecting something I couldn't identify, intelligence, or something else entirely. The dog barked again, running to the far side of the yard, sensing my hesitation. The man in black moved closer to me, his calm aura somehow giving me a fraction of confidence. You need to understand something, he said quietly. Not everyone who appears threatening is your enemy, and not every act of kindness is safe to ignore. Balance is what matters. I blinked, trying to absorb the meaning. My mind went back to the packages, the notes, the groceries, the small acts of consideration he had brought. Were they connected to this shadow? Was this some test orchestrated to teach me a lesson about trust, kindness, and vigilance all at once? My pulse raced, but my fear slowly began to mix with curiosity. Then, without warning, the shadow lunged again, this time to the side. The force made the gate shudder violently. The officers reacted instantly, trying to push it back, shouting warnings, but it moved with a speed and precision that none of us could match. Karen screamed once, then ducked behind the SUV. The dog yelped, retreating to my porch, sensing danger. I had no choice. I raised the shotgun, pointed at the shadow, and shouted, "Stop, now." The figure froze mid-motion, its head tilting slightly as if studying me, and in that moment, I realized something incredible. It wasn't attacking me. It wasn't here to harm me. It was testing me, observing me, waiting for me to decide how I would respond under pressure. The man in black nodded slowly, as if confirming my realization. Good, he said quietly. You see the balance. You see fear, but you also see choice. That is how you protect what matters without losing yourself. But before I could fully process his words, another sound cut through the tension, a loud crash from the back of the yard. My head snapped toward the noise. Something, or someone, had broken through the perimeter fence I hadn't even noticed. Officers shouted again, moving toward the source. Karen began wailing in panic. I realized, with a mix of dread and anticipation, that the next event wasn't just about courage or choice. It was about survival. And whatever, or whoever, had breached the fence, was now inside my property. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, bracing myself for the unknown. The dog growled low in its throat, warning me. The man in black took a step back, letting me face this new threat on my own. Karen was frozen entirely, paralyzed with fear. And I knew, deep down, that this was the moment that would define everything that came after. And that's where we pause. Right on the edge of the new extreme event, the one that could change everything, yet again. The shadow behind the gate has shifted, and a new intruder has breached the yard. The tension is unbearable, and the outcome uncertain. The sound of the fence breaking still echoed in my ears, sharp and sudden, like the crack of thunder in a quiet sky. My heart jumped, the shotgun rising instinctively to shoulder height. The dog growled low, fur bristling, as it darted closer to me, sensing the danger before I could even identify it. Officers were shouting orders, their voices tense but firm, trying to coordinate a response. Karen, pale and trembling, had backed against the SUV, her hands covering her mouth, muttering frantic warnings about property laws and criminal behavior. I scanned the backyard quickly. The breach had occurred near the corner of the yard, where a section of the wooden fence had been splintered and tossed aside. Beyond it, shadows moved faster than normal human speed. Something or someone was inside my property now, approaching from the back, where my family's garden and the small porch were located. My pulse surged, adrenaline flooding every vein. I remembered the man in black standing by the SUV. He hadn't moved. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the chaos around him, like a pillar of still water amidst a storm. I wondered briefly who he really was. Why had he brought the packages? Why was he here now, in the middle of this escalating danger? But there was no time for questions. I had to act. I stepped forward, positioning myself near the porch, shotgun raised. "Stay back," I shouted, voice sharp, commanding. The shadow from the gate hesitated, its low, deliberate stance, still maintaining distance. But the new intruder, the one from the fence, kept moving, swift and precise, almost gliding over the grass. The officers advanced cautiously, spreading out to contain the intruder, while Karen screamed into her phone again, reporting what she now claimed was a life-threatening invasion. The dog barked frantically, trying to alert me to the exact position of the intruder. My hands were trembling slightly, but I forced myself to breathe deeply, keeping focus. Fear was a tool, not a weakness. Then I saw it clearly. The intruder was not human, not exactly. Its movements were fluid, inhumanly fast, and its eyes glimmered faintly in the morning light. It paused for a moment, tilting its head as if analyzing the scene, the officers, Karen, and me. And then it lunged quickly, silently, but with intent. My shotgun roared as I fired a warning shot into the air. The intruder stopped, its motion halting mid-step, as if the sound had frozen it in place. The officers tightened their formation, shouting orders. But the man in black stayed calm, observing silently. I realized then that he wasn't just a bystander, he was a teacher in this chaos, letting me experience fear, control, and empathy simultaneously. I felt a strange mix of panic and understanding. The packages he delivered earlier, full of kindness, were a hint. The intruder wasn't necessarily here to harm me, but to test me, to push me to the edge. Karen shrieked again, pointing toward the intruder. "This is illegal. You can't let this happen." But I ignored her. My focus was entirely on the intruder, and protecting my property without losing control or judgment. I remembered another lesson from my grandmother. Courage is not absence of fear. Courage is knowing what to fear and still moving forward. The intruder's movement shifted suddenly, circling the backyard slowly, almost deliberately, scanning every corner. I realized it wasn't attacking, it was observing, testing, measuring. My muscles relaxed slightly, even as my heart continued to hammer. The officers seemed confused as well, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Karen was frozen entirely, phone clutched to her chest, too frightened to intervene. Then the intruder stopped, raising one hand, or what appeared to be a hand. In it, a small, glowing object appeared. It hovered in the air, radiating light, calm, and almost inviting. My stomach churned with confusion, but the adrenaline made me steady the shotgun, ready for anything. The dog barked, backing up slightly, unsure whether to defend or investigate. The man in black stepped forward calmly. "Do not shoot," he said softly, but with authority. "This is the lesson. Fear will tell you to react. Wisdom will tell you to observe. Control will tell you how to act." I lowered the shotgun slightly, focusing on the intruder and the glowing object. I realized, in that moment, that the extreme danger might not be physical. It was mental, emotional, even moral. The intruder wasn't just testing my reflexes, it was testing my patience, my understanding, and my empathy. I felt the tension in the air shift slightly. The intruder made a slow movement toward the glowing object. It hovered for a moment over the shattered fence piece, as if acknowledging the chaos it caused but also offering a choice. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of relief and confusion. I could approach, take the object, and potentially end this safely, or I could wait, allow the intruder to leave, and trust in the lesson being delivered. Karen, still screaming, barely noticed this subtle shift. The officers were tense, but unsure how to respond. The dog circled nervously, sensing my indecision. My gaze met the man in black's. He gave a small nod. Trust yourself. Stand firm, be kind, but be smart. I decided to take a step forward. The intruder didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to invite me, the glowing object pulsing gently. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down fear, adrenaline, the responsibility of choice, and in that instant, I realized something. Courage and kindness could coexist. I could stand my ground and protect my home while also respecting the presence of this unknown being. Then, without warning, the intruder moved again, this time faster, leaping toward the gate. The officers shouted, trying to intercept, but it was gone in a flash, disappearing through a gap we hadn't noticed before. My heart pounded, relief and tension colliding. The dog barked, running to investigate the spot where the intruder vanished. Karen was now hyperventilating, shaking as she held her phone. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to pursue. The man in black approached me slowly, placing a hand on my shoulder. You acted with courage, he said quietly. You observed, you protected, and you respected the unknown. That is how balance is found. That is how strength and empathy coexist. I exhaled, my body trembling from the release of tension. The dog licked my hand, sensing the change in atmosphere. Karen muttered something under her breath about never happening again, and stormed back toward the street. The officers remained cautious but relaxed their stance, giving me nods of acknowledgement. And yet, even with the intruder gone, the shattered fence, and the adrenaline coursing through me reminded me, the day wasn't over. The packages remained, scattered across the driveway, symbols of unexpected kindness. The man in black still stood by the SUV, silent, calm, and enigmatic. Then, a sudden noise from the front gate made me freeze again. The shadow that had hovered there earlier had returned, more deliberate, more menacing. The dog growled low in response. My chest tightened, and the shotgun rose instinctively. I realized that the day's extreme events were far from over. The lessons about courage, kindness, and empathy were still unfolding, and the next test was already here. The man in black nodded toward the gate once more. Prepare, he said softly. What comes next will challenge everything you've learned so far. At the edge of another extreme event, with the shadow returning, and the stakes higher than ever, the shadow at the front gate moved with a deliberate, almost predatory pace. My breath caught in my chest, and the dog's growl grew louder, reverberating through the quiet morning. The shattered fence behind me was a stark reminder that the intruder from before had not left without warning. Chaos had a way of repeating itself. I raised the shotgun again, keeping a steady grip, and positioned myself in front of the gate. My pulse pounded, each beat echoing like a drum in my ears. Karen was still frozen by the SUV, her face pale as if she had seen a ghost. She was muttering frantic warnings into her phone, shouting about trespassing, criminal activity, and calling for backup. The officers, tense and alert, fanned out in a semicircle, trying to cover every angle. The man in black remained by the SUV, calm and unreadable, a pillar of quiet authority in the midst of the chaos. His presence was oddly reassuring, even though I had no idea who he really was or what he wanted. The shadow stopped a few feet from the gate. It was humanoid, yes, but something about its posture was unnerving, too perfect, too controlled. Its movements had a rhythm that suggested intelligence, but not human intelligence. And yet, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, rather than immediate fear. This wasn't just about defending property anymore. It was about facing something beyond comprehension, and still finding the courage to act rightly. I took a cautious step forward. Who's there? Identify yourself. I shouted, my voice firm but calm, trying to maintain control. The shadow didn't respond, only tilting its head slightly as if studying me. My heartbeat accelerated, but I forced myself to take a slow, steadying breath. Panic would make me react blindly, and reacting blindly could lead to disaster. The dog barked again, darting closer to the gate, signaling that it sensed something unusual about the figure. I realized then that every sense, every instinct I had, needed to be sharp. Fear was a tool, but empathy and observation were equally critical. I glanced at the officers, who were tense, batons drawn. Their eyes flicked between the shadow and me, unsure whether to intervene or wait for me to act. Karen's muttering escalated into panicked shrieks. Then the shadow spoke. Its voice was low, deliberate, and strange, almost mechanical. "Step aside." I froze. My mind raced. Was this a threat, an order, or a test, like before? I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I remembered the glowing object the previous intruder had held, and the man in black's words. Balance is the key. Courage and empathy coexist when you understand fear, but don't let it control you. I didn't step aside. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, keeping my stance firm, but not aggressive. "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "This is my property. If you intend harm, you'll have to go through me." The shadow paused, studying me, then shifted slightly, its movements smooth and controlled. I noticed a subtle glint in its form, a shimmer that caught the morning sunlight. It wasn't a threat, not directly. It was testing me, seeing whether I would react with fear, anger, or calm determination. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Courage isn't about attacking or defending blindly. Courage is understanding the situation, maintaining integrity, and protecting what matters without losing control. Karen shrieked again, pointing wildly at the shadow. "Call the cops. This is illegal. You can't let this happen." But I ignored her. Her panic was a distraction, not a guide. The officers seemed unsure, hesitating between intervention and observation. The dog growled low, circling my feet as if sensing my internal deliberation. Then, without warning, the shadow raised one arm slowly. In its hand appeared a small, glowing object, similar to the one from the intruder at the fence. It hovered there, pulsating gently, as if inviting me to make a choice. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed caution, but every lesson from the morning told me to act wisely, not rashly. The man in black stepped forward slightly, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "You must choose," he said softly. "Fear will tell you to shoot or run. Wisdom will tell you to observe and decide. Empathy will guide your action. Remember, strength and kindness can coexist." I took a slow step closer. The shadow didn't move. Its eyes, or what I perceived as eyes, focused entirely on me. My mind spun with possibilities. If I reached for the object? Would it be safe? Was it a test, a trap, or an opportunity? I remembered my grandmother's words. "When the unknown comes, face it with courage, but always honor your principles." I reached out slowly, hand trembling slightly, toward the glowing object. The shadow's arm remained steady, the light pulsating gently. For a moment, everything in the world seemed to pause. Even Karen's shrieks faded into the background. The dog sat quietly, watching intently, as if it understood the significance of this moment. Then, suddenly, the object moved slightly, floating toward me. I froze, holding my breath. The shadow's posture relaxed, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging my calm and deliberate approach. The man in black nodded once, a subtle sign that I had chosen wisely. My hand closed around the object carefully, gently, and I felt a warmth spread through me, not physical, but emotional, like understanding and courage embodied in a single moment. But before I could even process the sensation, a new sound shattered the stillness, a loud crash from the backyard. My head snapped toward the noise. The section of the fence that had been broken earlier was now completely collapsed, splintered wood scattered across the grass. Something or someone had breached the perimeter again. The shadow at the gate stiffened, moving slightly backward, and the dog growled, ears pinned. Karen shrieked louder than ever, stumbling backward. The officers shouted, drawing their weapons, moving to intercept the new threat. My body tensed. I raised the shotgun again, heart hammering, ready for the unknown. And then, in a flash, I saw it. Another figure, moving faster than humanly possible, approaching from the shadows of the yard. Its movements were deliberate, controlled, and menacing. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming that danger was imminent. The man in black stayed calm, observing silently, letting me take responsibility for my actions. I realized in that moment that the day's events weren't random. Each extreme event, the intruder at the fence, the shadow at the gate, the glowing objects, was a lesson in courage, empathy, and balance. And now, with this new intruder approaching, I had to apply everything I had learned to survive. The dog barked fiercely, circling my feet, warning me. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself. This was the ultimate test, not just of my physical strength, but of my patience, my judgment, and my ability to act with integrity, under pressure. And that's where Chapter 5 ends. On the brink of another extreme event, with a new intruder breaching the backyard and the shadow still looming at the gate, my decisions, my courage, and my empathy are about to be tested like never before. The shadow lunged at the gate with terrifying speed. My shotgun rose instinctively, but I hesitated for a split second, remembering the glowing orb pulsing gently in my other hand. It radiated warmth and calm, almost like a reminder that not every threat was meant to harm. My body tensed, heart hammering, but I forced myself to stay grounded. I had learned that fear could be managed with clarity and patience, even when the extreme events of the day seemed impossible to predict. The dog barked frantically, circling my feet and barking directly at the shadow. Its low growl vibrated through the ground, warning me that whatever was coming was not ordinary. Karen had backed away to the SUV, shaking uncontrollably, muttering again about illegal trespassing and emergency police action. The officers formed a semicircle, weapons drawn, but their expressions betrayed confusion. They hadn't seen anything move like this before. The man in black remained calm, watching silently, as though he had anticipated this exact moment. The shadow's hand reached for the gate lock. I felt a surge of adrenaline, instincts screaming to fire. I raised the shotgun fully, finger on the trigger, ready to defend my property at all costs. But then I remembered the lessons the morning had brought. Courage wasn't just about reaction. It was about understanding, observing, and acting with purpose. I lowered my finger slightly, keeping control, and focused on the orb in my hand. Its light pulsed gently, as if encouraging me to make the right choice. Then the shadow froze mid-motion, its glowing eyes fixed on the orb in my hand. My pulse slowed slightly. Though my body remained alert, I realized that the shadow wasn't attacking, it was testing me, gauging whether I would act out of fear or restraint. The man in black took a step forward and whispered, "Patience. Every move you make defines who you are. Strength and empathy coexist when you choose wisely." I exhaled slowly, grounding myself. "I'm not your enemy," I said aloud, voice steady despite the chaos. The shadow tilted its head slightly, as if considering my words. The dog's growl softened, ears still pinned, but it stopped moving aggressively. Karen continued to scream, but her voice now sounded distant, drowned out by the tension of the standoff. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The morning sun shone on the broken fence, the scattered packages, and the approaching officers. The orb in my hand pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat. I felt a connection, a strange sense of calm that grounded me, even as the shadow remained poised, ready to strike. Then the extreme event escalated. The shadow's hand shot forward again, this time striking the gate lock with inhuman precision. Metal screeched, sparks flying as the mechanism strained. I fired a warning shot above its head. The sound cracked sharply, echoing across the yard. The shadow halted immediately, head tilting slightly, acknowledging the warning. It wasn't retreating, but it wasn't advancing either. It was waiting for me to make a decisive move. The officers tensed, unsure whether to intervene. Karen shrieked, tripping over a package and landing hard on her back. The dog barked sharply, circling between me and the shadow, sensing the tension in the air. I realized then that this wasn't just about defense, it was about courage, balance, and judgment, under extreme stress. Every movement I made mattered. Every choice carried weight. I slowly extended my hand toward the shadow, holding the glowing orb out in front of me. Its light pulsated steadily, almost like it was communicating trust. The shadow paused, then lowered its arm slightly, eyes still fixed on me. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of fear, relief, and curiosity. This wasn't a typical confrontation, it was a test of character, an exercise in empathy under pressure. The man in black nodded subtly, his calm presence radiating reassurance. "Now," he said softly, "observe, decide, act with intent." I inhaled slowly and took a cautious step forward. The shadow shifted slightly backward, maintaining its distance but mirroring my movements. The orb in my hand glowed brighter, warmth spreading through me. I realized then that courage wasn't about force, it was about clarity, observation, and patience. I could defend myself without losing control, without letting fear dictate my actions. Karen continued to scream in the background, but her words no longer reached me. The dog sat beside me, alert but calm, sensing that the moment required restraint rather than aggression. The officers remained tense, unsure whether to step in, but I felt the responsibility rest on me entirely. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, the shadow leapt back, disappearing from the gate entirely. My heart raced, but I kept my stance, shotgun raised, ready for anything. The orb's light pulsed once more, steady and reassuring. The broken fence behind me reminded me that extreme events were never truly over, they could appear at any moment, unannounced. Testing my patience and judgment again. As I looked around, I noticed that the packages I had ignored earlier now seemed symbolic, each a token of kindness, empathy, and trust, offered even amidst chaos. The intruder, the shadow, and the glowing orb were all lessons in balance. Courage tempered with understanding, fear tempered with judgment. I realized I had internalized them without even noticing, preparing me for the next challenge that was surely coming. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from the back of the yard. My head snapped toward the sound. The collapsed fence from earlier had been disturbed again. Something or someone was moving quickly among the shadows, approaching the garden where my children's play area and porch were located. My pulse surged once more. The dog barked, running to intercept, but I knew instinctively that this was another extreme event. I raised the shotgun fully, hands trembling but steady, orb glowing in the other hand. The man in black stepped slightly closer, observing silently, letting me handle the situation. Karen shrieked again, this time flailing near the SUV. The officers moved cautiously toward the back, but the intruder's speed made them ineffective, and then it appeared, a new figure emerging from the shadows, fast, deliberate, and menacing. Its eyes glimmered faintly in the morning light, radiating intent. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to remember the lessons of courage, empathy, and balance I had learned throughout the day. The dog barked, circling protectively around me. Karen cowered behind the SUV. The officers prepared for the unknown. I realized, in that moment, that the extreme events weren't just physical, they were mental, emotional, and moral challenges. How I chose to act in this moment would define not only the outcome of the confrontation but also my understanding of courage and empathy. At the peak of suspense, with the new intruder approaching the yard, and the shadow at the gate still lingering in the background, the next decision I make will be critical, testing every lesson I've learned today. The new intruder moved with a fluid, predatory grace across the yard, and my heart hammered in my chest. The dog growled low, circling my feet and glancing up at me as if urging me to act with precision. Karen, still cowering by the SUV, was now trembling violently, her phone clutched in both hands, muttering incoherent warnings to anyone who would listen. The officers were tense, weapons raised, uncertain how to handle something moving so unnaturally fast. The shadow at the front gate remained motionless, eyes glinting, silently observing everything. I gripped the shotgun tightly, the orb glowing softly in my other hand. Its warm, pulsating light was a strange comfort, grounding me amidst the chaos. I realized that today's events weren't just random acts of intrusion, they were tests. Each extreme event had forced me to confront fear, maintain clarity, and act with both courage and empathy. And now, facing this new intruder, I had to apply every lesson I had learned. The intruder's eyes locked on me, glowing faintly in the morning light. Its movements were deliberate and swift, closing the distance faster than any human should be able to. I planted my feet firmly, shotgun ready, and waited for the precise moment to act. The dog barked once, then sat, acknowledging that restraint was necessary. Karen whimpered from her spot, and the officers shifted nervously, unsure whether to advance or wait. Suddenly, the intruder paused mid-step, tilting its head as if evaluating me. The orb pulsed brightly, almost as if communicating approval. My pulse slowed slightly, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I realized that this was not just a confrontation, it was a test of judgment, of courage, and of understanding the unknown. Fear would tell me to react violently. Wisdom told me to observe and act with intention. Empathy reminded me that not everything unknown was dangerous. I took a cautious step forward, shotgun raised but steady. The intruder mirrored my movement, pausing again, glowing eyes fixed on the orb in my hand. Time seemed to stretch. Every sound amplified the dog's low growl. Karen's distant panicked cries, the creaking of the damaged fence. The man in black remained near the SUV, silent but present. A steady reminder that calm could coexist with chaos. The intruder made its next move, a sudden lunge toward the porch. My body tensed, instincts screaming to fire, but I remembered the lessons of patience and courage. I raised the shotgun just enough to warn, not to attack. The dog barked sharply, then moved to block the intruder's path, growling low. Karen screamed, stumbling backward again. The officers shouted warnings, but the intruder's speed was unmatched. Then, as suddenly as it lunged, it stopped. The glowing orb pulsed once, twice, and I realized the intruder was not here to attack me. It was waiting for me to decide how to respond. My mind raced. Every decision now mattered. Reacting with aggression could escalate the situation. Hesitation could give it the advantage, and yet, I felt a strange calm, a clarity I hadn't felt at the beginning of the morning. I stepped closer, holding the orb out, signaling understanding rather than hostility. The intruder paused, eyes locked on mine, then slowly lowered its hands. A soft hum filled the yard, subtle but perceptible, almost like the sound of energy moving. The orb's glow intensified slightly, and warmth radiated through me. I felt the lessons of the day crystallize. Courage is standing firm. Empathy is choosing restraint. And strength is knowing when to act wisely. Karen continued screaming, but her voice now seemed distant, background noise compared to the clarity of the moment. The dog barked once, then sat beside me, as if acknowledging the understanding between me and the intruder. The officers relaxed slightly, uncertain but trusting that I had control of the situation. Then, without warning, another extreme event erupted. A loud crash came from the side of the house. My head snapped toward the noise. The broken fence along the side yard had been breached. My pulse surged again. Another intruder, another unpredictable threat, was now inside my property. My muscles tensed. The dog barked, circling protectively, while Karen shrieked in panic, nearly collapsing against the SUV. The officers moved cautiously toward the side yard, but the intruder's speed and unpredictability made them hesitant. I raised the shotgun fully, keeping the orb in my other hand. The man in black stepped slightly closer, silent but observant. His presence reminded me that clarity and judgment mattered more than raw force. I took a deep breath, grounding myself, and prepared to confront whatever was coming. The intruder from the side yard emerged into view, tall, deliberate, moving with the same unnatural grace as the others. Its glowing eyes scanned the yard, then fixed on me. The orb pulsed gently, as if guiding me, reminding me to act with courage and empathy simultaneously. I realized that the lessons of the previous extreme events were converging. This wasn't just about defending my property, it was about maintaining balance under relentless pressure. I stepped forward, shotgun ready, orb glowing. The intruder moved closer, but slowly, deliberately, allowing me the choice to act without immediate aggression. The dog barked again, then sat beside me, acknowledging my leadership. Karen cowered further back, her phone shaking in her hands, muttering about legal consequences. The officers watched intently, unsure whether to intervene, but I knew that the responsibility rested entirely on me. Then, without warning, the intruder stopped, raising one hand slowly. A faint glow appeared in its palm, mirroring the orb in my hand. I realized immediately. This was another test. The intruder wasn't here to attack, it was here to see if I could maintain courage, empathy, and control under extreme circumstances. My heart pounded, but I stood firm. The man in black nodded subtly, a quiet affirmation of my composure. "This is the moment," he whispered. "Observe, understand, act wisely. Strength and kindness coexist when you face the unknown, without fear." I extended my free hand toward the intruder, allowing the orb's glow to meet the light in its palm. The yard fell silent, even the dog still. Sensing the significance of the connection, Karen's panicked cries faded into the background. The officers held their positions, tense but watchful, and then, just as I felt a moment of understanding settle, a sudden crash echoed from the front gate once more. The shadow, still lingering from earlier, had returned with renewed intent. My heart leapt. The extreme events were not over. The lessons of courage, empathy, and balance were about to be tested again. At the gate, the shadow at the front gate moved again. This time it wasn't just lingering, it advanced with purpose, deliberate steps echoing faintly across the driveway. The yard, once chaotic, now felt like a stage for something far beyond ordinary comprehension. My heart raced, shotgun in one hand, orb glowing in the other, adrenaline coursing through every vein. The dog's low growl vibrated through the ground, a warning that danger was imminent. Karen, now pressed against the SUV, clutched her phone, eyes wide with terror. The officers tensed, unsure whether to advance or wait. I felt a strange calm wash over me, even as the extreme events escalated. The glowing orb pulsed softly in my hand, warmth radiating through my chest, a reminder of the lessons I had learned: courage, empathy, and control. I realized that the shadow's return wasn't purely a threat, it was another test, a challenge to apply everything I had experienced so far. Each extreme event had pushed me to the edge, and this one was no different. The shadow stopped a few feet from the gate, its glowing eyes fixed on me. Its movements were slow, deliberate, measured. My muscles tensed, fingers gripping the shotgun tightly. The dog barked, circling protectively, while Karen whimpered quietly. The officers watched silently, unsure how to respond to this almost supernatural presence. The man in black remained by the SUV, calm, observing, and radiating an authority that made me feel steady despite the chaos. Then the shadow raised one hand slowly, a soft glow appearing in its palm mirroring the orb in my hand. I realized immediately that this was a test of judgment. Courage wasn't about pulling the trigger. Strength wasn't about attacking blindly. Empathy wasn't about surrendering. The shadow wanted to see if I could act with clarity and integrity under extreme pressure. I exhaled, grounding myself, and slowly extended the orb toward the shadow. Its glow brightened slightly, almost acknowledging my choice. The man in black nodded subtly, a quiet affirmation of my composure. Karen gasped, still paralyzed with fear. While the officers hesitated, observing the unfolding moment, the dog barked once, then sat, sensing that the moment required patience and understanding, rather than aggression. The shadow paused, then slowly lowered its hand. For a moment, silence fell over the yard. The orb in my hand pulsed gently, warmth radiating through me. I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted. But I knew better than to assume the extreme events were over. The broken fences, the intruders, the glowing orbs, they were all part of a chain, and the final test was surely approaching. Karen began to mumble, still clutching her phone, her panic subsiding just enough for her to observe the scene. The officers exchanged glances, their confusion mixed with cautious respect. The dog remained alert, sitting beside me, ready to react if needed. I realized that the events of the morning had changed me. Fear was no longer my primary guide. Observation, clarity, and empathy had taken its place. Then, without warning, a loud crash erupted from the side yard. My head snapped toward the noise. The collapsed fence that had been breached earlier was disturbed again. Another intruder, moving with the same unnatural speed as the others, had entered the property. My muscles tensed instinctively, shotgun rising, orb still glowing. The dog barked sharply, circling protectively, while Karen shrieked and stumbled backward. The officers moved cautiously toward the side yard, unsure whether to intervene. I took a deep breath, steadying my racing heart. The intruder's movements were deliberate, but it hadn't attacked yet. This was another extreme event, a final escalation designed to test my judgment, courage, and ability to act with empathy. I realized that if I reacted out of fear or anger, I could make a mistake that would escalate the situation further. I had to remain calm, controlled, and decisive. I stepped forward slowly, keeping the orb in front of me, shotgun ready. The intruder stopped, glowing eyes fixed on mine. It raised one hand, revealing a small, pulsating orb, like the one in my hand. I felt a surge of understanding. The extreme events weren't just about defense, they were about balance, about applying the lessons I had learned to survive without losing integrity. The man in black stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. This is the culmination. Observe, understand, act with courage and empathy. The extreme events are designed to challenge you, but your response will define the outcome. I extended the orb toward the intruder, keeping my movements deliberate and non-threatening. The orb pulsed brightly in response. The shadow at the front gate shifted slightly, watching, as if approving my actions. The dog sat calmly, sensing that the moment required patience and understanding. Karen muttered something under her breath, almost inaudible, but I realized she was beginning to calm down, observing rather than panicking. Then, the intruder slowly approached, stopping just a few feet from me. Its glowing eyes met mine, and for a moment, the yard felt suspended in time. The orb in my hand pulsed steadily, warmth spreading through me. I realized the final extreme event wasn't an attack, it was an invitation to understand, to act with balance, courage, and empathy. But just as I felt a moment of calm, a sudden, violent gust of wind slammed against the house. The broken fence rattled, debris flew across the yard, and the shadow at the gate advanced once more menacing than before. My pulse surged, adrenaline flooding through me. The dog barked frantically, circling protectively. Karen screamed, stumbling backward, nearly losing her balance. The officers shouted warnings, weapons raised. The extreme events were not over. I tightened my grip on the shotgun and orb, heart pounding. I understood now that courage wasn't about eliminating the threat, it was about facing it fully, with clarity and empathy. The intruder and the shadow were testing me one last time, pushing me to apply everything I had learned. The man in black stepped slightly closer, silent but steady, his presence a grounding force amidst the chaos. And that's where Chapter 9 ends, at the peak of suspense, with the returning shadow advancing and the intruder poised nearby, the wind howling, and every lesson of courage, empathy, and balance about to be tested in the final moments. Before we continue, where are you watching from? The shadow at the front gate advanced slowly, deliberately, while the intruder in the side yard remained poised, glowing orb in hand. My heart hammered like a drum, adrenaline surging through every fiber of my body. The dog stood firmly by my side, low growl vibrating, while Karen trembled near the SUV, barely able to stand. The officers fanned out cautiously, weapons raised but hesitant, unsure how to intervene against these seemingly impossible threats. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, keeping the glowing orb steady in my other hand. Its warm pulsation calmed me, grounding my racing thoughts. I realized then that all of the chaos, the intruders, the shadows, the glowing objects had led me to this precise moment. It wasn't just about protecting my property. It was about proving, first to myself, that courage, empathy, and clarity could coexist even in the most extreme circumstances. The shadow stopped mere feet from the gate, its glowing eyes locked on mine. Its hand hovered slightly above the orb in its possession, poised but not aggressive. The man in black stepped closer, voice calm and authoritative. "This is the final test," he said softly. "Fear will urge you to act without thought. Courage will guide your actions wisely. Remember, strength without empathy is nothing. Show balance." I inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of the orb flow through me. I took a slow step forward, shotgun lowered slightly, signaling awareness without aggression. The shadow mirrored my movement, keeping distance but remaining focused. The intruder in the side yard shifted slightly, eyes glowing, waiting to see what choice I would make. Karen whimpered quietly, finally stopping her panicked movement, her eyes wide as she watched the confrontation unfold. The dog sat firmly beside me, growling low, alert but calm, a protective presence. The officers tensed but held their positions, waiting for my lead. I realized fully that this wasn't a battle of weapons, it was a battle of intent, judgment, and heart. I extended the orb toward the shadow at the gate. Its light pulsed in response. The shadow's hand slowly lowered, and a gentle hum resonated through the yard. The intruder in the side yard stepped forward, orb raised slightly, and its glow intensified in harmony with mine. Time seemed to slow, the air thick with anticipation. I realized that the extreme events had never been about attack, they had been a test of courage, empathy, and balance. I spoke calmly, voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "I will not fight without reason. I will protect what is mine, but I will not harm unnecessarily." The shadow hesitated, eyes studying me. The orb pulsed brighter, almost as if acknowledging my words. The intruder mirrored my calm stance, lowering the orb slightly. The man in black nodded subtly, a quiet signal of approval. Then, in a sudden burst of motion, the shadow receded, stepping back toward the gate. Its glowing eyes softened, and the aura of menace faded. The intruder followed suit, slowly retreating toward the side yard, their movements deliberate but no longer threatening. The dog barked once, then sat, sensing the danger had passed. Karen exhaled shakily, finally able to stand, still clutching her phone but no longer screaming. The officers lowered their weapons slightly, relief flickering across their faces. A strange silence fell over the yard. The broken fences, the scattered packages, and the morning sunlight created a surreal scene. The orb in my hand pulsed gently one last time, warmth radiating through me. I realized fully that the morning's chaos had been a lesson in resilience, courage, and empathy. Every extreme event had forced me to confront fear, make decisions with integrity, and act with balance under pressure. The man in black stepped forward, voice calm and authoritative. "You have passed the final test. Courage, empathy, and clarity guided you, and that has resolved the conflict. Strength is not in domination, but in understanding and measured action." I nodded, chest heaving, overwhelmed by the realization. The intruders and shadows were gone, or at least, they no longer posed a threat. Their purpose had been fulfilled, and I had learned the lesson hidden in every extreme event. Karen approached hesitantly, still trembling. I don't understand," she stammered. "What just happened?" I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "courage isn't about fighting, it's about standing firm, making the right choices, and understanding the world even when it scares you." The dog barked softly, circling once before sitting beside me again. The officers approached cautiously, murmuring among themselves. I lowered the shotgun, keeping the orb in hand, and let out a long, steadying breath. The morning sunlight reflected off the scattered debris, broken fences, and glowing orb, and I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The extreme events were over. Balance had been restored. I looked around the yard, seeing the chaos of the morning in a new light. Broken fences could be repaired, intruders could be managed. But the lessons learned, the patience, courage, and empathy were permanent. I realized then that life, much like the events I had faced, would always present challenges. It was not the danger itself that defined us, but how we responded. Karen finally spoke, voice quieter, filled with awe rather than fear. You didn't just protect the property. You handled everything with control." I nodded, feeling both exhausted and enlightened. "Control doesn't mean fearlessness," I said softly. "It means understanding fear, and choosing how to act, despite it." The officers nodded, seemingly understanding the deeper truth behind the morning's events. The man in black gave a subtle, approving smile, and began walking away, fading into the distance as mysteriously as he had appeared. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the guidance, even if it had come in such an unusual and intense way. Finally, I turned my gaze to the orb in my hand. Its glow faded slowly, as if acknowledging the completion of its purpose. I felt a wave of calm and clarity, a reminder that courage and empathy could coexist, that balance could be achieved even in extreme circumstances. The dog nuzzled my leg, and Karen, now calmer, stepped closer, still wide-eyed but no longer trembling. I realized fully that the morning's events were not just a test, they were a lesson in life itself. Challenges would come, sometimes extreme, sometimes subtle. Fear would try to dominate, chaos would seem overwhelming, but courage, empathy, and clarity could guide any response. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. The yard was quiet now. Broken fences could be repaired, scattered debris cleaned, but the lessons of courage, empathy, and balance were permanent. I lowered the orb, feeling its final warmth dissipate into the morning air. The dog lay down beside me, content and alert. Karen finally exhaled fully, relief flooding her expression. The officers began packing up, murmuring about reporting the strange events to headquarters. And in that moment, I understood the truth. The extreme events, the intruders, the shadows, they were all lessons disguised as danger. Courage was not about domination. Empathy was not about weakness. And clarity was not about certainty, but about choosing the right action under pressure. The day had tested me, challenged me, and ultimately changed me. I looked around the yard one last time, chest heaving, mind clear. The lessons of the morning were complete, the extreme events resolved, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of what it truly meant to act with courage and empathy. As I stepped back into the calm of my home, I knew that this experience would stay with me forever, a reminder that life's challenges, no matter how extreme, could be met with balance, integrity, and understanding. Where are you watching from as you read this story? The yard was quiet. The morning sun warmed the grass, and for the first time all day, I smiled, knowing that courage, empathy, and clarity had won.